Hello, this is gonna be the first in a series of videos about web programming. It's something I'm just starting to learn, so as I learn more and more, I'm gonna post more videos to help teach myself, and if hopefully other people find it useful. I've kind of aimed it at the level if you've got a bit of a programming background and you want to sort of get up and running quite quickly, then that's the kind of level I'm aiming at. I'm not going to explain every single basic little thing. I'm assuming more that you're a programmer who wants to get into web programming when I do these videos. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to look at as I say, so today I'm going to look at these things here. So it's going to be URLs, HTTP transactions, HTTP methods, and a theoretical and sort of practical example using curl. The next video, I've already got this set up, but I was going to do it as one video, but it just took a bit too long. We're going to look at an actual little web service. It's got JSON files and APIs, PHP arrays, and these other details, PHP global variables and forms. And as I say, it's a program I've got on my GitHub account, so you can look at it and download it from there. Yeah, so the first thing to understand is URLs, right? It's a uniform resource locator. It's how your browser, the client, locates resources on the internet, on a server on the internet. It's how you locate a resource on the internet, which would be on a server, okay? And the general syntax is this, and everyone's sort of fairly familiar with this, apart from maybe the 80. Okay, now the HTTP is how you're interfacing with this resource, I suppose. There's different ways you can do it. You can use the FTP, file transfer protocol, HTTP, hypertext transfer protocol. So it's a protocol that's mainly used for transferring hypertext. Okay, FTP, file transfer protocol. It's a protocol that's mainly used for transferring files. So HTTP is the main one, and we'll look at that mainly today. The next thing here, this is actually the computer. You could think of this as, well, this your client, the browser, the actual resource is on a computer somewhere. We call it a web server. Okay, that is effectively the address of the web server. What will happen with this is it will go to something called the domain name server. What will come back from that domain name server will be an IP address. So that's how you locate the actual resource, or at least the computer that the resource is on. Next part, internet messages tend to work on channels. So the default channel for the internet is channel 80, but you can specify other channels, okay, and you can set your server up to listen on different channels. And then after that, we've got stuff 1, stuff 2, so that's basically tells you more about the actual resource itself, and it could just be a directory structure, something like file, or sorry, directory file name. It could just be a HTML file, and as simple as that. Or what happens is these two could go in maybe to some sort of PHP script, and the PHP script would manipulate them and send back some sort of meaningful HTML script based upon these two values here. So you could easily think of it as a directory file name. It's probably a perfectly reasonable way to have an idea of it, how to have a perfectly reasonable idea in your head, but it represents a reasonable representation, but it's not necessarily that. Okay. So just a quick example of this 80, which you don't normally see. If you remove it, it would be exactly the same. You remove the colon 80. This is going to be the same address as if it was there, provided the web server is listening on port 80, which I say is the default. So I've set up. Oh, it's logged me out. That's useful. Right. I'm just going to sign quickly in. I use Virgin here, and I have set up my computer as a web server. And to do that, all you really need to do is to use port forwarding, which is part of the advanced settings somewhere. There we go. So down here you see I've set up, this is the IP address on my internal server. It's not if you enter that into your browser, you won't see my web server. Okay, that's effectively on my own little internal thing. It's if you need a different IP address to actually access it from the outside. What will happen is if you had the IP address to access it externally, then it would be picked up on port 80, and then my home network would know to route to this internal address here. But you can see I'm basically telling to listen on port 80. So if you tried to communicate with my external web IP address on port 80, that would be fine, because that's how I've set it up to work, and it would get routed to this computer here which is basically the address of my Raspberry Pi where I keep my web apps and things like that. Okay. Right. So if we nip back to the previous one. Okay. So the next thing to look at is basically queries that can be part of this address. So you can also do this. All the syntax is question mark and then q equals or something similar. Okay. You're basically passing the variable q equal to test into this website here. All right. So let's have a look at that in action. So let's just say I just go to Google normally. Alright. Well, there you go. If let's say I want to actually search for something, so I'll now do question mark q equals test. And then it comes up with Google as it was before, but it's already got something ready to search for. So yeah, and then you find all the basically searches for test. So it passes that variable into your script. And you can have more than one. Alright, I've done one there. Let's say I've got some sort of form that I'm filling in at mysite.com, and I want to basically say the first name, second name, name 1, name 2, and they will get passed in as variables. You know, in my scripts that I use within my HTML and my PHP or whatever, I can get name 1 would be equal to this, name 2 would be equal to Smith. Now fragments are different again. They jump to a section of a web page. So if you enter in this address with this hash, it'll jump to a certain point within your web page. And basically, if you go to WC3 schools, you'll find that a lot of web pages are made out of a bunch of div tags with an ID. So you'll have, say, page, div 1, div 2, div 3, div 4, and they will be given an ID. So let's say I get div 4 is equal to comment, say, ID equals comment. Then here I have hashtag fragment would be comment. And then rather than go to the actual site right at the top and you see it and you have to scroll down to comment, it's going to put the comment part right at the very top. So it's quite useful in that way. Okay. And here's an example. I'll see if this will. I'd have to actually come back to the presentation to do this, but you see here, you can experiment with this if you want, if you really want to copy it all down. But I will at some point have this in my GitHub account, so you'll be able to refer back to it. But if you were to just put this bit in, you would just go to this part of the address. You would just go straight to the actual sort of main blog page right at the very top. If you were to put the same address in, then hash comments, you would go down to the actual comment section. So you can zoom ahead a bit. Alright. Now, in URLs, not everything is effectively a safe character or is a character that you can use or you should normally use. And the reason for it is that, for example, things like spaces, okay, are often misinterpreted. Is it one space? Is it two space? So if I tell you my web address is this, you might think all the space was a mistake. There could be two spaces. They're a bit ambiguous. So generally speaking, spaces aren't allowed, and there's a whole load of other things that aren't allowed. Now, just because they aren't allowed doesn't mean we don't ever want to use them. So when they're not allowed in that way, they're called unsafe characters. But we still might want to do this. It's still something we might want to do. Okay, you wouldn't do it as a rule, but you might want to sometimes do it. So unsafe characters, you have to encode them, and the way you do it, you have a little percentage sign, and then that is the ASCII code in hex for a space. So we've got this, boom, boom, boom. The space gets replaced with this. Okay. Here you go. You've got a list of this site here. It's very easy to find. List of ASCII characters. Just go here, right? It will basically you will see in the hex column. You go over to the space, and you'll see. Just go over to scroll down to where you see hex is equal to 20, and you'll see that's basically the space. All right. So just percentage sign the value in hex rather than the actual value itself. Okay, you can't use it like that. There's a full discussion about some of the ins and outs I was talking about a minute ago at this website here with this standard. Okay, basically the sort of real low-level discussion of exactly how all this works with Tim Berners-Lee on there, etc. Okay. Now, HTTP transactions is the next thing we're going to talk about. So there's two parts to a transaction. There's a request and there's a response. Now you have to have a method for the request. You have to have a URL, which is what we're just speaking about, and we have to have a version, and we have to have headers, and we have to have a body. We don't have to have a body necessarily, but most of the other things tend to come with them. And then we have a response, it's a version, status, reason, headers, body. Now, it's just what you'll normally see when you actually do searching the internet, is you will normally just enter in the URL. The headers will get set for you by your browser. The method will typically be get, and we'll talk about why in just a moment. And the version at the moment, it's as far as, well, when I ran with curl, it was practically a minute ago, it was HTTP 1.1. A GET request won't have a body. That will then come over here, and what you'll get back is you'll get version, which is just the same as this. Okay, comes back again. Status, that will tell you whether it's worked or not, and the reason. So these two are connected. You'll then get a bunch of headers, which is kind of like metadata, and then you'll get the main body back again. So what you'd normally do if you type in a URL is you'd see that, and you'd see that. You'd see what you type in and what you get back. But all this other information is important as to what's going on, so we'll talk a little bit more about this other information now. Okay, and the first thing to talk about is probably the methods. Okay, so get basically retrieves a resource. It's what you normally do when you're browsing. You're normally getting the web page, but the HTTP has a method for it called get. There are other ones. You can store a resource, remove a resource, and you can update a resource. Now, as when you get, you don't change the resource or anything like that. You just literally view it in some way. All right. So it's called a safe resource. All these other ones here actually modify the resource in some way, right? Okay, so they're unsafe, and there's more to, well, there's additional security problems with these. However, this is a perfectly safe resource, method, sorry. Okay, so that's the method part talked about. The URLs, what we already spoke about. HTTP will be something like HTTP/1.1 because it's just a version number, that's all that is. So the next thing I think in my list is headers. About to come up next. Let's see. Yeah, headers. So host is mandatory, and it's basically a little bit like the URL, except the thing about the URL is you might want to have on a web server you can have a number of different web pages, I guess, a number of very different web services, and for a small company you would want to maximize. You don't want to have a situation where you have one web page or one web service or one whatever it is that you're doing, one web application on one server. So basically, if there's something specific you're looking at, if you want to go, if you've got a server with more than one web page on it, you need to specify which specifically you're looking at here. Okay. User agent, what this tends to be is info about the software making the request. So if I use curl, which I did just a minute ago, this will say something like curl. If I'm using Firefox, there'll be something about Firefox here, Internet Explorer, etc. Accept language. Now, with this one, you can say, okay, I just want English, but if you request a French website, it might just say, oh, well, I'll try and put it in English, but I can't. So you'll get it back in French because it's the only language it's available in. So these headers, this one's actually mandatory. You have to have that in 1.1, I think. But not all the others are necessarily. You don't necessarily have to have this. You don't necessarily have to have this. Okay, etc. All right. So that's basically metadata about the message. I'm looking specifically at this website. I'm looking using this browser. I want to read it in English, but if you've got French, I'll have to have French. Okay. So that's the headers bit spoken about. Fine. After that, we've got status and reason. So if everything works fine, all right, you'll get something like a 200 to 209 status with a reason of OK. Everything's worked fine. It might be the case that you're accessing a website that's been moved, and then it might be permanently moved, it might be temporarily moved. So you would get a redirection status, something like 300, something in the range 300 to 399, with this reason. Okay. All right. So yeah, that's covered most of that, and then the actual bodies here will be what you get back. If you were using, it's worth saying, if you were doing a post here, you were doing post method, then your body would actually contain information, right? But for most GET requests, there's no real need to have anything in the body. For example, if you do a GET request with a query string, that query would wind up in the URL. It wouldn't wind up in the body. That's not the same with the post. Because it effectively being in the body means it's also encrypted, so that's a positive. Alright. good. So this is just a theoretical example. So what exactly does everything look like? So this is the first line you have in your HTTP message. Get the website. So the method, the URL, the HTTP version, the host, site.com, and then some metadata, and we've got no body here. Alright, the metadata or the headers, they always seem to have this format, host : site. So if you're looking for headers, it's always, you can always identify them like that. Okay, so that's an example of a request, and then the response could be something like, well, again, you've got the HTTP version, it's 200, so it's worked, and then we're having the reason OK. Alright. Content type, so I'm saying it's text HTML, right? And then after that we have the HTML, the actual body of the message itself, and that would get processed by your browser typically, and you would see it. So that's the sort of example in theory. Now, curl I've found to be a very useful resource for trying to understand these things, and I'll do a bit more with it in a moment. But the good thing is, not only with curl and things like that, and also I think if you go to the browser and you look at the debugging tools there, I know there's other ways of doing similar things to what I'm going to show you now, but you can see all the header information and everything else that gets passed with the message. And one simple way seems to be to do this with curl. All I'm doing is I'm basically getting that standard from the internet sort of standard organization here. Not call that exactly, it's called, well, you can look up what, if you put it in, you'll find it's some sort of standards on the internet organization, and I'm downloading this particular file using curl, so I'm effectively getting it. Okay, you don't put that in explicitly here, just like you wouldn't in your web browser, but you're saying I want to see everything that's happening. If I put this here, then the body of the return actually just goes into info.txt, so I just have to look, what I'll see is just headers and some other connection information as well. So when I do that, the first thing I see here is, I think this is basically sort of connection information. There's a bit about server certificates. There's a bit here about well, RSA is an encryption method of some sort. Here we're doing get, we get this, and you can see how it follows pretty much exactly what I was saying. And here we have the response. So again, you're seeing the HTTP version number, the status, the reason. One thing I have noticed when I've started doing this using curl, and it does make sense, that here they haven't got the full URL, they've just got the actual resource part of the URL, as I was explaining earlier on, which does make sense when you have effectively a host here, because what are you saying? Well, this is the host, this is the resource on that host, so it ties up in a sort of slightly more logical way to the book I was reading and the sort of half taking examples from, and I was showing you earlier on. So what seems to me to happen is that you get the host information here, and then you get the resource information here, which does make good sense when you think about it. And here you see the user agent curl, and I expect that's the version of curl. I expect that's saying accept anything. And then we have a response. Okay, you can see the same information. We have a date, we have a content type, it's just plain text, it's just a TXT file. There's no HTML, so before we had text HTML, if you remember the other example, there's another content type. And then the actual info itself would show us the body of the response. So we'll have a quick look in that. And if we go down, yeah, you see more and more. Basically, this is just a really in-depth. You can see some of the things I was talking about here. They've called them like scheme, authority. Okay. Path, query. So again, fragment. What they're talking about authority is an interesting way of saying basically the computer and the or the server, I should say, the website. I call it computer because what's a server? That's the first thing they'll say. So yeah, they've called it authority. But again, you see pretty much the same thing. You've got the address of the web server and the channel it's listening on. Alright, so this is a very sort of in-depth discussion of what we've been talking about. Okay, I hope you found that useful. As I say, I will put the next video up will be an actual web service of some sort, so look out for it. If you want to do that, please look out for it, and please like the video if you liked it.